What we see on the left is Basquiat's Horn Players, a canvas from 1983. It's a triptych, so we have three separate panels of half-length portraits and several drawings and words, several of which are also crossed out. There's a dark background with words in white paint, words like dizzy, referring to Dizzy Gillespie, or ornithology, alchemy. And despite the kind of chaotic nature of this composition, it's clear that the main subjects of Horn Players are two famous jazz musicians, the saxophonist Charlie Parker and the trumpeter Dizzy Gillespie, who Basquiat has depicted here in both linguistic and visual portraits. And many of the words relate specifically to Parker. For example, ornithology, the study of birds. This is also the title of a famous composition by Parker, and it's also a reference to his nickname, Bird. Basquiat loved this kind of wordplay, and it extends across most of his work. There's, over the body of his work, 2,000 paintings and drawings. There's an overwhelming abundance of written words on the canvas. And he began as a street artist, and he often left cryptic messages throughout the walls, across the walls of Lower Manhattan, under the name SAMO, S-A-M-O, an acronym for Same Old Shit. And he loved to kind of jokes, this kind of wordplay. And so at first, he's this incredibly young street artist working outside of the gallery system. And so he goes from SAMO to then commercial success at warp speed in the early 1980s. And he was often referred to in this time as the Black Picasso. He never embraced that nickname, but he was also concerned with his own place in art history. In fact, he often appropriated the work of early avant-garde artists like Picasso, Manet, amongst others, painters that Basquiat greatly admired. But he wanted to rewrite art history and insert himself into the canon. Let's look at Horn Players, for example, next to Picasso's three musicians. This echoes, he uses the triptych format, and we see that referenced in Picasso as well, with the three figures across the canvas. But it's not a kind of direct appropriation by any means. Basquiat died, I believe a few years after this painting, kind of in the later 80s. He was only 27 years old, died of heroin overdose, and his works sell for tens of millions of dollars today. Jeff Koons is another postmodern artist who seems to, kind of wants to provoke here. Is he, is this a kind of reverential sculpture of Michael Jackson and his pet chimp Bubbles? What is he trying to say with this work? Remember the importance of ambiguity in postmodernism. Similarly, in the Pink Panther sculpture, here seen from two different views on the left, we have this kind of blonde, scantily clad woman, bare-breasted, smiling, clutching a limp pink panther, while she's also covering her exposed breast. And there's this kind of embrace here of kitsch, and that's another typical characteristic of postmodernism. The colors are also kind of antiquated too. They harken back to design and pop culture of the 1950s. The turquoise, the pink. Is this a statement of nostalgia? Why is Jeff Koons referencing this very politically regressive era? And what is he saying about this busty kind of blonde bimbo figure? Is he trying to parody male authority? Is he, what are we meant to, how are we meant to understand all of this? Similarly, in Michael Jackson's work, there's a kind of tackiness to the work of Jeff Koons here that references kitsch. And kitsch is a word that refers to mass-produced imagery designed to please the broadest possible audience with objects of questionable taste. Think about, kind of with overly sentimental. And postmodern art embraces kitsch because I think modernism wanted to, kind of distance itself as much as possible from kitsch. And so, modernism champions the rise of abstraction, originality, and postmodernism wants to focus on these quotidian, banal aspects of everyday experience, the kind of everyday life. We're going to move to later waves of feminism and really think about the generations of artists who came after women like Judy Chicago and Miriam Shapiro. This third wave of feminism wanted to move beyond the goals of the second wave to say not just that women's contributions need to be acknowledged, but we need to move beyond that. We need to critique institutions of power that have historically discriminated against women. And one way of doing that is critiquing the gaze, making us aware of the power of the gaze and how the gaze is understood as male, heterosexual, cisgender, and Barbara Kruger's untitled work, I think, really drives this message home. To say your gaze hits the side of my face, making us aware of the violent, aggressive nature of the gaze, that the gaze is never disinterested, and the gaze can be a kind of assault. Where the gaze is understood to be male and the focus of the gaze is understood to be female. And she wants to resensitize us to this power dynamic. She continues to work in these kind of photo installations, these photo montages, and here we see her later work, All Violence is the Illustration of a Pathetic Stereotype. She assaults us with racial slurs and stereotypes to make us aware of how women, people of color, are profiled in mass media. Again, to raise our awareness, to resensitize us. Similarly, the Guerilla Girls also want to point out the problematic nature of our institutions that we take to be pillars of society. They form in the 80s. This is an era of extreme conservatism in the United States and Europe. Ronald Reagan is president, and there's a major cultural backlash in the 80s against the social justice movements of the 60s and 70s. The Equal Rights Amendment fails to pass, and the Guerilla Girls form an anonymous collective of women artists to create billboards, broadsheets, posters to critique museum practices. And this is one of their early posters here above. Do women have to be naked to get into the Met Museum? Less than 5% of the artists in the modern art sections are women, but 85% of the nudes are female. And they cleverly here have taken Ingres' Grand Odalisque, an early 19th century French painting, and put a head of a gorilla on. I also want you to note the wordplay here as well. This is not This is guerrilla as in a kind of military revolution, not as in gorilla, the large primate. Here's one of the Guerilla Girls textbooks, their bedside companion to the history of Western art. And here's a recent action that they did in London just 2 years ago, where they're moving their performances and speaking engagements, their poster campaigns, to also consider issues of inclusivity and diversity. You can see that they asked hundreds of European museums about diversity and only a quarter responded. Unless you think anything has changed much over the 30 years since the Guerilla Girls were founded, I encourage you to look at these rather dismal statistics from the 4 major museums in New York about how many women have had one-person exhibitions there in 2015.